Before this video begins, I'd just like to give an extra special thank you to my patron, the Beast Boss. Links to join the Patreon can be found in the description down below. My favourite classic Doctor Who story has recently been removed from BBC iPlayer, so let's talk about why I love it so much. Okay, so I've talked about this story, The Seeds of Doom, before. I did a Patreon exclusive unedited review of this story, which I then edited down at some point to be a YouTube video, which I uploaded about a year ago now, I think. But I was already planning on doing a proper scripted and edited review for this episode, because it's my favourite classic Doctor Who story that I've seen so far, so I think it deserved it. But it's now even more relevant than ever, as it's just been removed from the iPlayer along with Terror of the Zygons, which is actually a weird coincidence as well, because I recently saw a box set with this story on it in HMV, and I decided to not buy it because I thought, well, they're all on the iPlayer now, so I can just watch them whenever I want, only to find out a few days later that it was being removed, which is a bit of a coincidence and a little bit annoying considering I had it in my hands and was debating buying it without knowing that it was about to be removed from the iPlayer. But with all that being said, let's get into the review of Seeds of Doom. So the first couple of parts of this story seem to be inspired by The Thing from 1983, with there being an alien starting to take over this Arctic base. However, like I just said, The Thing is from 1983 and this came out in 1976. So you might start to wonder, did this story inspire The Thing? But that's not necessarily the case, because although the film The Thing came out in 1983, it was a remake of a film from 1951 called The Thing from Another World, which itself was an adaptation of the book Who Goes There from 1938. So it seems to be more taken from that original story than the actual film The Thing itself, because obviously that film wasn't out at this point. But it does basically feel like the first two parts of the story is kind of ripping off that story. Also, I don't know where else to mention this in this review, but Tom Baker is just hilarious throughout this whole serial. He's got some really funny moments. I don't know if he was just really drunk or if these parts were scripted or what, but he's just hilarious in this whole story.
Turn around, Doctor. Okay, stop talking.
Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart had perfect pitch.
What happened to him?
Who, Wolfgang Amadeus? Oh, him. Oh, he died.
So the monster of this story are the Crinoids, which are an alien seed that infects people and sort of turns them into this plant-like monster, which I think is a really cool idea and does differentiate itself from The Thing, which it seems to be inspired by, or I guess the original story that The Thing is based on. And the reveal of the first victim to be infected by the seed of the Crinoid is a very terrifying moment in this story. But with all that being said, the Crinoids aren't actually the main villain of this story. The main villain of this story is Harrison Chase, who is a very unique and interesting villain, at least from what I've seen in classic Doctor Who, because he's just a normal guy that is obsessed with plants. Throughout this whole story, you think there's going to be a reveal that he's working for the Crinoids or working for some higher power, but no, he's just a guy who's really obsessed with having the best plant collection, to the point where he blows up an Arctic base and will kill for these plants. With that being said, there is a point later on in this story where he does seem to be kind of hypnotized by the Crinoid or influenced in some way. It's left vague enough to where I can still believe that it is just because he's obsessed with these plants, but I'm not a big fan of that kind of indication that he might be being sort of hypnotized in some way by the Crinoids, because I like the idea that he's just a guy that's become that obsessed with plants that he's going to kill for them. We also have Chase's henchmen in this story, and I really like the dynamic between these two characters, because you've got the one that takes this as an opportunity to be as violent as possible and maybe takes it as an opportunity to kill some people, and then on the other end of that you've got the botanist guy that's following him around as well, who clearly doesn't really want to hurt anybody and clearly doesn't want to be part of this after he finds out kind of how far it's going. And he's actually the character that gets turned into the main Crinoid at the end of this episode, and Harrison Chase almost uses him as an experiment, which makes you feel really bad for him. The main thing I want to talk about this story, and the reason I love it so much, is the pacing of this story, because most classic Doctor Who stories over 4 parts tend to be a bit tedious and boring, and they often outstay their welcome and tread water quite a bit. But this 6-part story is structured perfectly and keeps you engaged in it. This whole story in 6 parts almost follows a 3-act structure, with the first 2 parts being in the Arctic base and basically doing the whole Thing homage, or at least a homage to the original story that The Thing is based on, and is almost like a base under siege kind of action horror set piece, pretty much. Parts 3 and 4 mostly take place in Harrison Chase's house in England, but there's no Crinoid yet, just the seed, and so the main threat of these 2 parts is mostly Mr. Chase and his henchmen. And then parts 5 and 6, the final act in this 3-act structure, is everybody being trapped in the grounds of this house with the Crinoid that has now infected the botanist character. The only thing that I'm not as impressed by with this story is the ending of this story. Unit basically basically just show up and blow up the whole house with the ever-expanding Crinoid attached to it, with the main characters escaping just in time. And the lack of Nicholas Courtney as the Brigadier makes it even more disappointing. I know he was meant to be in this, but he couldn't be, but it makes it an even more disappointing ending to a great story. And it's the last proper appearance of Unit for a little while as well, which makes it a little bit more disappointing. But like I said, with all that being said, this is my favourite classic Doctor Who story that I've seen so far. Obviously, I've not seen a lot of classic Doctor Who at this point, and I've just slowly been making my way through some episodes. But whenever I do watch a story that I have enough to say on, I will cover it in a Patreon exclusive review, unedited, on my Patreon. So if that's something you'd be interested in, you can join the Patreon now and get access to all of the classic Doctor Who stories I've reviewed so far. And if you have a particular classic Doctor Who story you'd like to see me review on there, comment it down below. And with that being said, if you'd like to see the full unedited initial review of the Seeds of Doom I did about a year ago now on my Patreon, I'll make sure to have that linked down below, as well as my review for Terror of the Zygons, which is another episode that has been completely removed from the iPlayer recently, and I'll have the YouTube membership versions of them on screen now.